Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Benjamin Chong Alfares with the top reports from the economy worldwide. Coming up, Uber takes on the world, and Jokowi may have what Indonesia needs. First, the headlines. French bank BNP Paribas agreed to pay nearly $9 billion on Monday and plead guilty to crimes for violating U.S. sanctions against Sudan, Iran, and Cuba. The unprecedented settlement includes a year-long ban on the French bank's ability to conduct certain U.S. dollar transactions. The $9 billion penalty is equal to the amount of transactions proven to be criminal, though by law, prosecutors could have sought double that amount. BNP Paribas admitted to using regional banks overseas to process more than $20 billion for Sudan when the nation was engaged in genocide.
In this case, BNP went to really elaborate lengths to conceal prohibited transactions, to cover its tracks, and to deceive United States authorities. They used so-called cover payments to hide the involvement of sanctioned entities in transactions that were processed through New York and elsewhere in the United States.
China's factories boosted output in June, indicating that government stimulus efforts are injecting vigor into the economy. The official Purchasing Managers Index, a gauge of nationwide manufacturing activity, edged up to a 6-month high of 51.0 in June from 50.8 in May. The HSBC PMI index, which monitors smaller private firms, rose to 50.7 in June from 49.4 in May, the first time this year that it stood above 50. Recent monetary and fiscal loosening measures helped reinvigorate the economy, but a slowdown in property might require further stimulus. The Bank of Japan's quarterly Tankan survey showed business sentiment among Japan's big manufacturers worsened in the second quarter, but should improve in the following 3 months. Manufacturer sentiment fell by 5 points from 3 months ago to plus 12, deteriorating for the first time in 6 quarters. The survey also suggested major companies would increase spending more than expected this year, boosting the country's economic recovery. Big manufacturers are optimistic that exports will pick up and consumption will weather the April tax hike, thereby improving business conditions in the next quarter.
This is evidence that the economy remains on track for a moderate recovery and that the fallout from the sales tax hike has been kept to a minimum.
Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko renewed operations against pro-Russian rebels on Tuesday after a ceasefire with the separatists expired. Kiev accused the rebels of numerous violations of the ceasefire, including the killing of 27 Ukrainian servicemen since the ceasefire began on June 20th. EU leaders warned Russia of more restrictive measures if the territorial dispute were not resolved, but actual actions have been limited so far. On Monday, 400 Russian sailors arrived in France to undergo training aboard one of 2 Mistral warships being sold to Russia in a controversial €1.6 billion deal taking place in the midst of the Ukraine crisis.
We will attack and free our land. The non-extension of the ceasefire plan is our response to terrorists, rebels, and marauders, to all those who torture civilians, who paralyze the country's economy, who wreck payment of salaries, pensions, and studentships, who explode railway stations and destroy water pipes, who deprive people of a normal, peaceful life.
Mobile apps greatly improve our standards of living as they bring useful information and services into our reach. But little apps like Uber have a major impact on traditional markets worldwide. Daniel Roth has more in this report.
With just the press of a button, Uber shows me all the private drivers nearby ready to pick me up.
Uber Technologies, an app that connects drivers with people looking for rides in a sort of digital taxi network, has taken the world by storm since it was founded in 2009. It has also been the source of anger for a growing number of drivers using the Uber app to connect to passengers who say the service is treating them poorly. They demonstrated in front of the company's Santa Monica offices last week. Separately, taxi drivers have been protesting the use of the app altogether as it cuts into their business.
I mean, you drive this kind of Mercedes S550 for $1.20 a mile. You barely, as the driver, will be making the minimum wage, or maybe to pay the loan on this car if you don't pay cash.
In my opinion, I have big experience, more than 25 years of driving a life. Sorry, 23 years. I never see service business like this. It's impossible. It's the biggest fraud I ever see.
Uber has drawn the ire of drivers in California because they have set up new rules with short notice stating that they would have to upgrade to cars no older than 2010 in order to be considered for their Uber Black luxury service. The other option is to be transferred to the lower scale, cheaper UberX service. The drivers see their contribution as being central to the growth of Uber from a small startup to a company valued at $18 billion. They say that the model doesn't leave room for a livable wage, while Uber maintains that they are not an employer and shouldn't be expected to take care of workers as such.
All of these drivers are independent contractors. We don't employ any drivers. They license our platform. We welcome them to use the platform as much or as little as they like. Some people use this as just a way to supplement their income. They may have a full-time job and use this a few hours a week.
The startup is now operating in 38 countries on 6 continents, according to their website. And taxi drivers in Washington, D.C., London, Madrid, Rome, Paris, and elsewhere in Europe took to the streets, creating traffic chaos to protest the existence of the app earlier this month. They see Uber as stepping in from the side, breaking local rules, and stealing business from them without licenses.
Many are asking how an app that appears to be little more than an unconventional cab service got an $18 billion valuation. Here with more details on the Uber story is Sam Chester, analyst at Clarity Capital. Sam, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, so what's going on here? $18 billion? Isn't that overvalued?
I think there's different ways of looking at it. Most objective assessments of Uber, looking at the revenue stream and other factors, have valued the company around $6 billion, which means the company, as valued today, over 300% overvalued. Why? Why may this be so? I think part of the reason you could look at is that there's an irrational exuberance that takes hold in the tech communities where you have investors and innovators living in the same bubble community, mostly in Silicon Valley and California, believing in the same belief that tech can solve everything. And as a result, as we saw in the high-tech bubble in the late 90s, that irrational exuberance can lead to bubbles and overvaluation.
Looking more recently, I mean, like we've seen over the past year, all these different apps, all these different companies basically going for IPOs and just being what a lot of people think is overvalued tremendously. I mean, just a couple of billion here, a couple of billion there, you know, it's unbelievable.
I agree, though. I think there is another side of the story, which is based in this idea of a disruptive technology. Essentially, Uber, like some of these other apps that you mentioned, is seen as upending the way that we've done business until now. Examples that people are very familiar with: Facebook changed the way that we socialize. Amazon changed the way that people purchase goods and obtain goods. So in Uber's case, not only are they trying to transform and redefine the way that you get from point A to point B, but what they're really trying to do is change the culture and the society of ownership. So that instead of living in an ownership society, we live in a society of sharing. So instead of buying things, we're renting things. And that concept is seen as so disruptive that it could introduce into business interactions in our daily life, similar to Facebook, similar to Amazon, and that potentially is a $20 billion idea.
I do have to interject here. I mean, I very much like your assessment there, but at the same time, okay, you know, you look at Amazon. I mean, you just said Amazon and Facebook in the same sentence, which in and of itself really kind of bothers me, because Amazon is a company we've seen since the mid-90s. You know, they've actually given a very clear product and service, which has changed over time. But, you know, we have history proving that Amazon made sense. We don't necessarily know what's going to happen with Facebook, and we certainly don't know what's going to happen with Uber, right?
For sure. There's no question that a big part of this recent valuation for Uber is based upon what could become. I think to contrast it, though, with companies like Twitter, which is valued at almost $25 billion, or at Facebook, which is obviously far more, supports the case for Uber even, because Uber, unlike Twitter and unlike Facebook, it's not getting its revenue stream from advertising, which is an unpredictable market. Uber's revenue stream comes from the interaction and the purchase, the renting of a good and of a service, of someone picking you up in a vehicle and getting you from one place to another. The other point I would add is that, as savvy investors know, when a company is able to, what we call in the financial world, take advantage of the consumer surplus, which Uber does by this concept called surge pricing, where essentially, unlike typical cab companies, what Uber does is that after a sporting event, during bad weather, Uber charges more for a ride than the standard fare. So by varying their pricing, they take advantage of when participants are willing to pay more, and that's very attractive to investors.
Now, this is obviously attractive to investors, and it's certainly filling someone's pockets. But is it fair? I mean, I'm talking not just about the consumers, but I'm talking also about the other cab drivers out there. You know, this is their living. I mean, we've seen a lot of protests happening.
For sure, Uber is a very aggressive company, and much of their success, they haven't reinvented the wheel, literally.
Right.
What they do is they're very aggressive, and they move into markets. They face competition from local taxi companies, which tend to not only be monopolies and not only be localized companies with strong connections to the local municipality, but they're backed up by a regulatory system that doesn't support a technology and like Uber. Okay. As a result, you see, as the report suggested, tremendous resentment. And what's interesting for Uber, actually, and it's been a product of its success, is that Uber has taken bad PR and transformed it into what has worked for Uber, good PR. Protests in Paris, protests in San Francisco from drivers, from passengers upset about surge pricing, has actually led Uber to expand and to get its name out there even more to more and more and more consumers.
Okay. Sam Chester from Clarity Capital, thank you very much for joining us and for giving us more on the Uber story.
It's always a pleasure.
Indeed. The front-runner to be Indonesia's next president, Joko Widodo, or Jokowi for short, has a promising reputation for getting things done. But as Southeast Asia's largest economy continues to slow down and more than half of the country lives below the $2 a day poverty line, he's got his work cut out for him. Here's the story.
This is the current frontrunner to be Indonesia's next president. Here, Joko Widodo, better known as Jokowi, is playing to the home crowd on his campaign trail in the city of Solo, where he grew up. He was the city's mayor for 7 years before becoming governor of Jakarta, and most people here have no doubt he's the right man to lead the whole country.
Jokowi represents honesty and hard work. He doesn't talk too much, he just acts.
Widodo has a reputation for getting things done. In Jakarta, he introduced health and education cards for the poor, started to build a metro, and instigated a dredging program to help combat flooding. In his hometown, he provided street vendors with a decent market location and moved slum dwellers into multi-story flats.
Ya gini, kalau di bantaran terang ya gitu, kena banjir, kalau hujan kena.
Where we lived before, it was always flooding. There wasn't even a proper bathroom. Now that we've moved here, we have full facilities and everything is good.
But if he's elected, tackling the country's problems won't be easy. Corruption is rife, the economy, Southeast Asia's largest, is slowing, and more than half of the country lives below or around the $2 a day poverty line. Jokowi's critics say he's too soft and that the country needs the promised iron fist of his rival and former general, Prabowo Subianto.
I won't vote for Jokowi because he's not firm enough. On the contrary, Prabowo is firm and he will set up a clean government.
The gap between the two candidates is narrowing as the July 9th poll gets closer. But if Jokowi wins, the city will be proud that one of their own, a common man and son of a timber seller, has made it all the way to the top.
And now for a discussion of different articles collected just for you in Media Watch. Daniel Roth.
How's it going?
Again. Good. So we're talking about GM.
GM is back in the news, not for good reasons. The Wall Street Journal has it. Everyone has it. This is a huge, huge story. As you know, some months back, Mary Barra became the first female CEO of the company. It was huge news.
Breaking into the boys' network, so to speak.
Of course, they left her with a complete and total mess. Yeah. They had known for 11 years that there were faulty cars, and only as she began this winter did this news start to trickle out. And now, so with this latest recall announced on Monday, 8.5 million cars recalled, vehicles recalled, bringing the number up to almost 30 million this year.
Unbelievable.
30 million that they knew about for 11 years that they know caused at least 3 deaths, 8 accidents and injuries. These are things that they know and have admitted And you're talking about huge, huge losses. And this is, at the end of the day, it's a big lesson in really owning up as soon as possible. Right now, in the first quarter, they took a $1.3 billion hit. And in this quarter, they're already seeing that this is costing them $1.2 billion. This latest recall is just bumped up that number by $500 million.
The question is, how many more recalls are we going to see? I guess it's anyone's guess.
It's unknown. They know these faulty switches and these mistakes have gone back to at least 1997. So we're going to have to see.
Well, obviously, we're going to talk about this more. Daniel Roth, thanks for joining us. That's the end of The Economy Magazine, your daily source for economic and financial reports. It's I-24 News. I'm Benjamin Cholmafaris. Follow us on Twitter and send us your feedback via the link on the website. Join us again tomorrow.